There was a time in this country when a mother's love was the strongest force on earth, when the bond between a mother and her child was sacred, unbreakable, the kind of bond that could not be undone by distance, by circumstance, by hard luck, or by the cruel hands of strangers. But somewhere along the way, life got messy. Families fell apart. Mothers and children got separated by systems they could not control, by choices they had not made. And some of those mothers, the brave ones, spent the rest of their lives carrying the quiet weight of an empty space that never went away. But what happened on that Monday afternoon on the Family Feud stage would remind every single person in that room, and millions of viewers watching at home, that some bonds cannot be erased, that a mother's love does not have an expiration date. And that sometimes, when a single mother has been quietly mourning the loss of her child for 32 years, the universe has a way of bringing that child right back into her arms. On a stage, in front of cameras, with a host who knows exactly when to step out of the way and let a moment of pure, unfiltered grace happen. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of Family Feud episodes over the years. He had been a part of all kinds of reunions, brothers and sisters reuniting, husbands and wives finding each other after deployments, old friends meeting again after decades apart. He thought he had seen every kind of family reunion that television could offer. But on this particular Monday, Steve Harvey was about to witness something he had never seen before. A reunion that should not have been possible. A reunion that had taken 3 full decades, an army of strangers, a quiet investigator, a viral DNA test, and one brave young man's refusal to give up. A reunion that would prove a mother and a son who had been told they would never see each other again, that the world had moved on without them, that what was done could not be undone, would all be proved wrong. Steve was going to look that single mother in the eyes. He was going to tell her something he had been holding in his chest for the entire taping. And in the quiet moment that followed, when the doors at the back of the stage opened slowly and a young man walked out, this single mother who had spent 32 years convinced she had lost her son forever, was about to find out that she had not lost him at all. She was just early. He had just been on his way back to her this whole entire time. Before we get into this beautiful story that will absolutely change the way you look at the people you love, please do me one quick favor right now. Hit that like button below, smash that subscribe bell too, because stories like this one are exactly why we are here. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end of this one. This is not a story you will forget, not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. To understand why that single mother had been mourning for 32 years, you first need to understand who she was. Her name was Diane Carter. She was 56 years old. A retired social worker from a small town in Tennessee. A grandmother of 4 through her 2 adult daughters. And a woman who carried in the deepest part of her heart a grief that nobody who looked at her could see. Diane had been raised by good parents in a small Tennessee town. Loving, strict, church-going people. Her father had been a pastor. Her mother had taught Sunday school. They had raised Diane and her younger brother to believe in God, in family, and in doing the right thing no matter how hard it was. But when Diane was 18 years old, the summer after her high school graduation, she had made a mistake, or what her parents had called a mistake. She had fallen in love with a young man from the next town over, a young man named Marcus. Marcus had been sweet. He had been charming. He had been a black man in the rural South in the early 1970s. And Diane, a young white woman from a family of pastors, had not understood at first why her parents had been so worried. Diane and Marcus had dated quietly for a few months. They had thought they had been careful, they had thought nobody knew, but word had gotten back to Diane's father. Her father had forbidden her from seeing Marcus again. Her mother had cried. Her brother had stopped speaking to her. And Diane had done the only thing her young heart had known to do. She had run away. Diane and Marcus had run together to Memphis. They had thought they could make a life there. They had thought they could be free. But Marcus had been killed in a car accident just 3 weeks after they had arrived. A drunk driver, late at night. Diane had been left alone in a strange city, 18 years old, broke and pregnant with Marcus's baby. She had not been able to go home. Her father had told her clearly that if she came back, she would not be welcome. Diane had survived in Memphis the best way she could for the next 8 months. She had worked as a waitress. She had stayed in a small boarding house. She had eaten what she could afford. And she had grown bigger and bigger every week, knowing that the baby inside her was the only piece of Marcus she had left in the world. When the baby came, Diane had given birth in a small charity hospital. A beautiful baby boy, with Marcus's eyes, with Marcus's smile. She had named him David. Diane had held that baby in her arms for 48 hours. She had counted his fingers. She had counted his toes. She had memorized every line of his tiny, perfect face. And then a social worker had come to the hospital. The social worker had told Diane the truth she had been refusing to face. Diane could not raise this baby alone. She had no money. She had no family. She had no home. And in 1973 in the rural South, a young white single mother with a black baby had been a recipe for nothing but suffering, for Diane and especially for the baby. Diane had signed the papers. She had given her son David up for adoption. She had been promised that he would go to a good family, a loving family, a family that could give him a life she could not. And then a nurse had taken her baby away. And Diane had watched her own son disappear through a hospital door. She had not seen him again, not for 32 years. Diane had eventually gone home to her family. Her father had died about a year later. He had never apologized. Her mother had welcomed her back quietly. Diane had gone to college. She had become a social worker. She had spent her whole career trying to help families stay together, trying to make sure that what had happened to her did not happen to other young women. She had married a kind man named Robert. They had been married for 28 years until his death from a heart attack 5 years ago. They had 2 daughters together, Sarah and Emily, who were now grown with kids of their own. Diane had told her daughters about David when they had been teenagers. She had felt that they deserved to know they had a half-brother out there somewhere. The girls had been heartbroken for their mother. They had asked to help her find him. Diane had agreed, but only halfway. She had been afraid that David would hate her for giving him up, afraid that he had been mistreated by his adoptive family, afraid that he had died young and would never know his real mother had loved him every single day for 32 years. She had searched. Every few years she had paid for searches. She had hired a private investigator twice. She had registered on every adoption reunion website she could find. She had submitted DNA tests. Nothing had ever come back. The records had been sealed. The trail had been cold. The years had piled up. And eventually, Diane had made a kind of peace with the fact that maybe she would never know what had happened to her firstborn son, but she had never stopped looking. Not really. Every Christmas. Every birthday. December the 7th. Every year, she had bought him a card. She had written in it. She had put it in a shoebox under her bed. There were 32 cards in that shoebox now. 32 years of cards Diane had never been able to give to her son. When Diane's daughter Sarah had suggested they apply to Family Feud as a family team, Diane had said yes because she loved spending time with her girls. She had flown out to Los Angeles with Sarah, Emily, her son-in-law Mike, and her sister Carol. She had stepped onto that Family Feud stage. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, that a young man named David had spent the last 3 years of his life looking for her, and that he had finally found her. The Carter family came onto the stage warmly. They were a tight-knit group. Diane was clearly the heart of them. Her 2 daughters, Sarah and Emily, flanked her on either side, both of them beautiful women in their 30s who had clearly inherited their mother's quiet kindness. Mike, Sarah's husband, was a friendly-looking guy who laughed easily. Carol, Diane's younger sister, was the loud one, the family joker. Steve came over and shook everybody's hand. When he got to Diane, something in her face caught his attention. There was a softness about her, but also a sadness. The kind of sadness that lives behind a person's eyes even when they are smiling. Steve had seen it 100 times. He recognized grief when he saw it. "Miss Diane," Steve said, "tell me about yourself, sweetheart. What do you do?" "I am retired now, Mr. Harvey. I was a social worker for 35 years. 35 years, Steve said. "That is a hard career, a career of helping people through their worst moments." Diane nodded. "Yes, sir, it was a calling." Steve looked at her for a moment longer than he might have looked at somebody else. He could feel something. He moved on to her daughters. He chatted with Sarah and Emily for a moment. He made jokes with Mike. He got a big laugh out of Carol, who was clearly enjoying herself. The game started. The Carter family was playing well. Sarah was sharp. Emily was funny. Carol was loud. Diane was steady. They were tied with the other family, the Garcia family from New Mexico, after the first round. It was during the second round that something happened. Steve asked a question. "Name something a parent might keep that reminds them of a child they have lost." The Garcia family buzzed in first. They got pictures for 38 points. Then they got baby clothes. Then they got a lock of hair. Diane was last to buzz in. She held the microphone for a moment. The whole studio could see her hesitate. Her face changed. She finally said very quietly, "Birthday cards." The board turned around. Birthday cards was on there. Number 5, 7 points. Diane's family cheered politely, but Steve had seen Diane's face when she had said it. He walked over to her. He looked at her carefully. "Miss Diane," Steve said, "birthday cards, that was a different kind of answer. You picked it for a specific reason, did you?" Diane was looking down at the podium. She nodded slowly. She did not look up. Her daughter Sarah reached over and put her hand on her mother's back. Steve waited. Diane finally looked up. Her eyes were full of tears that she was holding back with everything she had. "Yes, Mr. Harvey," she said softly. I gave a son up for adoption 32 years ago. I was 18 years old. I had no choice. He was the only baby I had ever had at that point. His name was David, or it was when I named him. I do not know what they named him after I gave him up." The audience went silent. Steve's face changed. His whole posture changed. He stepped closer to her. Diane continued, her voice trembling but steady. "I have bought him a birthday card every single year for 32 years. I have written in every single one. I have never been able to send them. I keep them in a shoebox under my bed. There are 32 cards in there now, one for every birthday I have missed." Several people in the audience had started to cry. Steve had taken a step back. He was trying to compose himself. He was a father. He was a grandfather. The thought of those 32 unsent birthday cards had hit him in the gut. "Miss Diane," Steve said, "have you ever tried to find him?" Diane nodded. "I have tried, Mr. Harvey, for decades. I hired private investigators. I registered on every reunion site. I have submitted my DNA to every test I could find. I have done everything I could think of. The records were sealed. The trail went cold. After all these years, I have made my peace with it, or I have tried to. I just hope. I just hope somewhere out there he had a good life, that somebody loved him the way I would have loved him if I had been able to keep him." The audience was silent. Diane's daughter Emily was crying. Sarah was crying. Carol was wiping her eyes. Even Mike, the son-in-law, was wiping his face. Steve stood there for a long moment. He was nodding slowly. Then he did something the production team had not expected. He stepped away from his mark. He walked over and stood directly in front of Diane. He took her hand. "Miss Diane," Steve said gently, "sweetheart, can you do me a favor and just hold my hand for a minute?" Diane looked at him, confused, but she nodded. Steve held her hand. He took a breath. He glanced over at the producer in the wings. The producer nodded at him. Steve nodded back. His eyes were filling up. "Miss Diane," Steve said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be brave for me right now. Can you do that?" Diane was confused, but she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Harvey?" "Miss Diane," Steve said, "3 weeks ago our show received an email from a young man. The email was very long. It told a story. The story was about a young man who had been adopted in 1973 in Memphis, Tennessee. Adopted by a wonderful family who had raised him with love, who had told him from a very young age that he was adopted, who had encouraged him when he had grown up to look for his biological mother if he wanted to." Diane's mouth dropped open. Her hand went limp in Steve's. Steve continued, his voice cracking slightly. "This young man told us that he had been looking for his biological mother for the last 3 years, that he had submitted DNA tests to every site he could find, that he had hired investigators, that he had been searching, and then 6 months ago he had finally gotten a hit. A DNA match, a close family member, a maternal first cousin." Diane was staring at Steve. She was not breathing. "That cousin," Steve said gently, "led him to your sister Carol. Carol over there." Diane's eyes flew to her sister. Carol had her hand over her mouth. She was crying too. She was nodding. Diane could not understand. She could not process what she was hearing. "Carol," Diane whispered. "Carol, what is happening?" Carol could not speak. She was just nodding and crying. Steve held Diane's hand a little tighter. "Miss Diane," he said, "about 4 months ago your son David found Carol. Carol called your daughters, Sarah and Emily. The 3 of them have been working with us, quietly, carefully, for 4 months. They wanted to do this in a way that was right. They wanted to make sure your son was a good man, that he had a good life. They wanted to be sure before they told you, because they did not want to break your heart if it did not work out." Diane was shaking her head. She could not believe it. She kept looking at her daughters. Sarah and Emily were both crying, both nodding, both confirming what Steve was saying. Steve squeezed her hand. "Miss Diane," he said. His voice was very gentle. "Sweetheart, your son is here. He flew in from Chicago this morning. He has been waiting backstage for the last 3 hours, and he wants to meet you today if you will let him." Diane's knees gave out. Her daughter Sarah caught her on one side. Emily caught her on the other. Diane was shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She was trying to speak, but no words would come out. Her mouth was opening and closing. Her hand was trembling in Steve's. Finally, she found her voice. It was barely a whisper. "David," she whispered. "My David, he is here." Steve nodded. He had tears running down his own face now. He was nodding and trying to smile. "He is here, Miss Diane. He is right here. Whenever you are ready, sweetheart." Diane closed her eyes. She took a long, slow breath. The kind of breath you take when you have spent 32 years preparing for a moment you never thought would come. She opened her eyes. She straightened her shoulders. She nodded. "I am ready, Mr. Harvey." Steve nodded back. He stepped to the side. He gestured toward the back of the stage. The doors at the back of the stage opened slowly. The audience went completely silent. 200 people held their breath as one. A man stepped through the doors, a young man, 32 years old, tall, strong, handsome. He had Marcus's eyes. He had Marcus's smile. He had Diane's chin. He had Diane's hands. He was wearing a simple dark suit. He was holding something in his hand, a small bouquet of white flowers, and he was crying. Tears were pouring down his face. He had not even taken 3 steps onto the stage, and he was already crying. Diane saw him, and she fell. She fell to her knees right there on the stage. Her hand flew up to cover her mouth. The sound that came out of her was a sound that nobody had ever heard her make before, not in 56 years of life. It was the sound of a mother who had just been given back the child she thought she had lost forever. David started walking toward her, slow at first, then faster. He dropped the bouquet halfway across the stage. He did not even notice. By the time he reached his mother, he was running. He fell to his knees in front of her, and the two of them, mother and son, separated for 32 years and 3 months and 4 days, finally fell into each other's arms. For a long moment, nothing happened in that studio except the sound of two people crying. Diane was holding David. David was holding Diane. Their faces were buried in each other's shoulders. Both of them were sobbing. The audience was completely destroyed. 200 people were openly weeping. Steve Harvey had stepped back. He was wiping his face with his hand. He had given up trying to be the host. He was just a witness now, just a man standing on a stage watching a miracle happen. After what felt like a very long time, Diane pulled back, just enough to look at her son, really look at him. She held his face in her hands the way a mother holds a baby's face. She was studying every line, every feature. She was looking for the baby she had memorized 32 years ago in that Memphis hospital. She was finding him. The eyes were the same, the shape of his nose, the little dimple in his chin. He was her baby. He was Marcus's baby. He was the boy she had been carrying in her heart for 3 decades. "You look like your father," Diane whispered. Her voice broke. "Oh my God, you look just like your father." David smiled through his tears. "I do not know what he looked like, Mama. I have never known." Diane's hand flew up to her mouth at the word Mama. Nobody had called her that in many years. Her own daughters called her Mom. The word Mama, the word a small child uses, was a word she had only heard from her grandchildren. Hearing it from her grown son, from the son she had lost, broke her open all over again. Diane held him tight again. She kept whispering things into his ear. The audience could only catch some of it. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry, baby. I tried to find you. I never stopped looking. I am so sorry I could not keep you. I loved you so much. I have loved you every single day." David was nodding into her shoulder. "I know, Mama, I know. I always knew. Somehow I always knew." A producer stepped forward gently. Her name was Karen. She had a small microphone. She had been the one coordinating the reunion for the last 4 months. She walked carefully toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen said. Her own voice was thick with emotion. "I want to tell you the story of how this happened, because it is a story you will not believe." The audience listened in absolute silence. Diane and David were still on the floor of the stage, holding each other. Sarah and Emily had come over and knelt beside their mother. They were touching her shoulders. They were touching their newly found brother. They were a family now, all 4 of them, together for the first time. Karen continued. "David Williams, the young man you see here, was adopted as a newborn in Memphis in 1973 by a wonderful couple named Robert and Linda Williams. He grew up in Chicago. He had a beautiful childhood. His parents were honest with him from the beginning. They told him he was adopted. They encouraged him to learn about his heritage when he was old enough. They supported him completely. David and his adoptive mother Linda, who is here today, by the way, have always had a wonderful relationship." An older woman walked carefully out from the wings. She was probably 70 years old. She had silver hair, a kind face. She was crying too. This was Linda, David's adoptive mother, the woman who had raised him for the last 32 years. She walked over and stood near where David and Diane were sitting. She did not say anything. She just stood there, smiling through her tears. Diane looked up at Linda. Linda looked down at her. The two mothers, the woman who had given David life and the woman who had given him a life, looked at each other for a long moment. Then Diane reached out her hand. Linda took it. Both women, both mothers, started to cry harder. Linda knelt down on the floor next to them. She put her hand on David's shoulder. "Diane," Linda said softly, "I have been waiting to meet you for 32 years. Thank you. Thank you for giving him to us. We loved him every single day." Diane could not speak. She just nodded and pulled Linda into the hug. Now there were 3 of them on the floor, the 2 mothers, the son, all of them holding each other. Karen continued the story. "David started looking for his biological family 3 years ago when he was 29 years old. He started with the simple stuff. Online searches, adoption databases, a few of the popular DNA testing services. For 2.5 years, he got nothing matched, nothing connected. The records were too old. They had been too well sealed. 6 months ago," Karen continued, "he tried one more DNA service, a smaller one. The results came back with a hit, a first cousin, a maternal first cousin. The match was Diane's sister Carol." Carol nodded from where she was standing. She was crying too. "David reached out to Carol through the DNA service," Karen said. Carol was shocked. She knew her sister had given up a baby decades ago. She had heard about David growing up. She and Diane had talked about him many times over the years. Carol immediately reached out to her nieces, Sarah and Emily. The three of them got together. They video chatted with David. They got to know him. They wanted to be absolutely sure before they brought him into their mother's life. Their mother had been through too much heartbreak already. They did not want to add to it. Sarah spoke up softly. For 4 months, Sarah said, we got to know David. We told him about Mom, about our childhood, about Marcus, about everything. He told us about his life, about his job. He is an architect, Mama. He designs buildings. He is married. His wife is here too. They have a little girl. You have another grandbaby, Mama. Her name is Eloise. She is 3 years old. Diane gasped. I have a granddaughter. David, you have a daughter. David nodded, smiling through his tears. Eloise, she is 3. She is here too, Mama, with my wife. They are backstage. A young woman stepped out from the wings. She was probably 30 years old. She was holding the hand of a tiny little girl with curly dark hair. The little girl was looking around with big, curious eyes. She was wearing a small pink dress. The young woman walked them over to where David and Diane were sitting. Diane saw the little girl. She gasped again. Eloise looked exactly like Diane had looked when she had been 3 years old. The same dark hair, the same chin, the same little curl in her bangs. Eloise looked at Diane. She tilted her head. She studied this strange woman who was crying, then she walked over very slowly. She stopped right in front of Diane. She put one little hand on Diane's tear-streaked cheek. And in a small, clear voice, she said, Don't cry, Grandma, I am here. Diane completely lost it. She pulled little Eloise into her lap. She was sobbing into the little girl's curly hair. Eloise just sat there in her grandmother's lap, calm, patient, the way little kids sometimes are when they sense that something important is happening. Steve Harvey had to turn his back to the cameras for a full minute. He could not host. He could not even speak. He was just standing off to the side, his hand over his face, trying to compose himself. Eventually, he came back. He told both families that the rest of the taping was canceled. The Garcia family from New Mexico, the other team, were in tears on their podium. The mother of the Garcia family walked over to Diane. She knelt down. She kissed Diane's forehead. She said in a soft voice that her own son had been given up for adoption many years ago and she had never found him. She said watching this had given her hope. She said she was going to start looking again. The episode aired 13 days later. The network had decided to run it as a special 2-hour event. Within 24 hours of airing, the clip of David walking out from behind the doors had been viewed more than 140 million times. It became the most viewed video on the Family Feud YouTube channel in the show's entire history. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Morning shows wanted interviews. Magazines wanted features. Diane and David, both of them quiet people, did very few of the interviews. They said they wanted to keep the story for themselves, to not let the world consume what was sacred to them, but the impact of the story extended far beyond their family. A national movement started online. People began sharing their own adoption reunion stories, adoptees who had been searching for biological parents, birth parents who had been searching for the children they had given up. The hashtag #NeverGaveUp trended for nearly 2 months. DNA testing companies reported their largest spike in subscriptions ever. One company said the spike outpaced even their Christmas season sales. Steve Harvey used the attention to do something significant. Within 2 months of the episode airing, he announced a new foundation called the Diane Carter Reunion Initiative. The foundation provided free DNA testing kits, genealogy research services, private investigation services, and emotional counseling for birth parents and adoptees who were trying to find each other. The foundation also worked with state and federal lawmakers to push for changes in adoption record laws, advocating for adoptees' rights to access their own birth records. Within its first year, the foundation had helped over 1,000 birth parents and adoptees find each other. Some of those reunions ended joyfully. Some of them did not, but all of them got a chance. All of them got a beginning. Diane and David, after the taping, did not waste a single day. David flew Diane up to Chicago to meet his adoptive father, Robert, and to spend a full week with his family. Diane held her granddaughter, Eloise, every single day of that visit. She read her bedtime stories. She made her pancakes. She tucked her in at night. She made up for 32 years of grandmothering in 7 days. David's wife, a kind woman named Jennifer, treated Diane like she had always been part of the family. Linda, David's adoptive mother, made the entire week feel like one long, warm family gathering. Diane went home to Tennessee with a heart full of something she had not felt in 3 decades. Wholeness. She finally felt whole again. The empty space that had been carved out of her heart at 18 years old had finally, after all this time, been filled. She and David called each other every single day. Long phone calls, sometimes for hours. They were trying to make up for 32 years of small talk. They told each other everything, about their lives, about their childhoods, about their dreams, about their fears. They became, in a remarkably short amount of time, what a mother and a son are supposed to be. On Diane's first birthday after the reunion, David flew Diane out to Chicago. He and his wife threw her a small birthday party in their home, just family. Linda was there. Sarah and Emily and their families had flown up. Alois had decorated the kitchen with a paper banner she had made herself. After dinner, after cake, David handed Diane a small wrapped gift. He told her to open it. Inside was a leather album, a photo album. David had spent the last 6 months putting it together. It had pictures from his entire life. Baby pictures, school pictures, his high school graduation, his college graduation, his wedding, the day Alois was born, every milestone, every important moment. Every photo had a caption. David had handwritten each one. The captions told the story of his life, the story of the boy his mother had not been able to watch grow up, the story she had been missing for 32 years. Diane sat on the couch and went through that album page by page. She cried through the whole thing. Linda sat next to her and explained the stories behind some of the pictures. Diane finally got to know the boy she had given up, the man he had become, the husband and father he was now. By the time she got to the last page of the album, she had memorized every face, every milestone, every chapter of his life. She had finally, in some small way, got to be present for it all. On the last page of the album was just one photograph. Picture taken on the Family Feud stage. The moment Diane and David had embraced for the first time in 32 years. Below the photograph, David had written one line. "For the mother who never gave up, the mother who waited, the mother who loved me before I even knew I needed to be loved." Diane keeps that album on the coffee table in her living room. Every visitor to her home is shown the album. Diane tells the story to anybody who will listen. She says it is the most precious thing she owns. David eventually moved his architecture firm's main office down to Memphis to be closer to his mother. He visits Diane every 2 weeks. They have Sunday dinner together at her house in Tennessee. Alois calls Diane Grandma D and crawls into her lap whenever she is over. The two families, the Carters and the Williams, have completely merged. Holidays are big and loud and full now. Christmas dinner has 30 people at the table. Diane sits at the head, surrounded by her 2 daughters, her son, her sister Carol, her son-in-law, her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren, and Linda. 2 mothers sharing one son who had been brought back together by the most unlikely of circumstances. The shoebox of birthday cards, the 32 cards Diane had written over the years. Diane finally took them out from under her bed. She gave them all to David. He keeps them in his office. He reads one every year on his birthday. He says it is like getting a letter from his mother from a different decade every year. He says it is the closest thing to time travel he will ever experience. Diane lives for many more years after the reunion. She is fully present in David's life now. She watches Alois grow up. She is there when Alois starts kindergarten, when Alois gets her first lost tooth, when Alois loses her training wheels. Diane was there for every milestone she had missed with David. She made sure she did not miss a single one of Alois's. Steve Harvey kept a photograph in his office from that day, a picture of Diane holding little Alois on her lap, both of them in the middle of the stage, David and Linda kneeling beside them. Steve has said many times that it is one of the most important photographs he owns. He says he keeps it to remind himself why he does the work he does. He says that some moments are so much bigger than television. Some moments are why television was invented in the first place. Diane often says something when people ask her about her story. She always says it the same way. She says, "I gave my son away because I thought I was saving him. It turns out God had a longer plan. He was going to give him back to me. I just had to wait for the right time. And I am here to tell you, no matter how long you have been waiting for something, no matter how impossible it feels, do not give up." Sometimes the people we have lost find their way back to us. Sometimes the prayers we said 32 years ago get answered on a Monday afternoon, in the most unlikely of places, with the most unlikely of help. God's timing is not our timing, but it is always perfect. That is the legacy, that is the story. A young mother who gave up everything in 1973. A son who never stopped wondering. A DNA test. A sister who became a bridge. 2 daughters who quietly built a path home. An adoptive mother who had loved a boy for 32 years and was generous enough to share him. And a television show that was wise enough to step out of the way and let a miracle happen. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. And share this video with somebody who needs to hear this message. And then if you have somebody in your own life that you have been searching for, somebody you lost touch with, somebody who is missing from your life, do not give up, keep looking, keep praying, keep hoping, because somewhere out there that person might be looking for you too. And one day, on a day you do not expect, the door at the back of your life might just open. And the person you thought you had lost forever might walk right through it. Thank you for watching. And remember, love is patient, love is kind. And love, real love, never ever gives up. Never.